It's said in some circles that using a mind to spy on your geopolitical neighbors, particularly strong psychic minds, is the equivalent of using a sports car and a private jet to pick up your groceries a block away. I mean, you can do it. It's very, very doable, but it's just a waste of energy and wear and tear on your machines and machinery. So, in order to use these tools for what they're meant to be used for, or what they're better designed for, we'll be undertaking a little bit of a journey now. The format of these videos so far has been largely experimental, but today let's start on one of the paths that have largely emerged as, a more interesting set of trajectories that this sort of thing can go on. Now, when people go and look at objects like the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, all these other ancient monoliths, there's a sense that they're connected to the stars, calendars, presagers of catastrophe, and they're not wrong, but there's a deeper connection that underlies the very fabric of reality in terms of the way thoughts merge and transfer through space-time. Our sun, though it's been called a small yellow dwarf, is actually, amongst the larger sets of stars, has a, let's say, roughly 10 billion year lifespan that we're smack dab in the middle of right now, at 5 billion years, and is, trudging away, burning its fuel. Will eventually turn into a supergiant, red giant, give off its mass and fall apart. Now, what's interesting thing about this is that most stars don't actually go through this process. Most stars in our universe are brown dwarfs, or dwarf stars. They're still very red, to be clear, but instead of a 10 billion year lifespan, they've got something on the order of 1 trillion years. Tens, if not hundreds of times longer than our star system. And most of them have been in existence for as long as the stars have been around. They do get more frequent after the deaths of earlier generation stars. But for our sake, for our purposes, we'll just act as though they were always there. Now, the first of these stars that I want to visit, the name doesn't really matter. I mean, we can give it a name. Some people like to call it the Saturnids, but it's kind of irrelevant, because as far as the occupants are concerned, the guttural sounds that we make from our faces have no analog for the way they describe their planets and stars. And I'd like to leave it like that, just, as a sign of cultural respect. Now, these stars, well, this star in particular, has been around for about 13 billion years, making it one of the oldest star systems in our solar system. And as a red dwarf, though it's a bit more radioactive or radioactively unstable relative to, yellow dwarves, our star system. But the net output of the star is much lower than ours. What makes this interesting, though, is that the star does not have a lot of metal around it. But of the metal that it does have, the planets around the star system are much higher gravity than our star. The life that evolved on this planet, though short relative to us, are very strong, and ironically enough, their planet has a higher access to super heavy elements than ours. So it created a whole new series of branches for their technology to follow. From here, what gets interesting is they began to colonize their star system billions of years ago. Maybe 2 billion years. But because of the high gravity of these planets, it was never really deemed worth it to leave in the traditional sense. They weren't explorers, they were expanders, they're scientists, they're curious about the outside world, but didn't see a reason to go there because it wasn't worth the effort to move thousands and thousands upon thousands themselves across the stars. Now, this species, because of the relatively low output but high instability of their star, have a much lower mutation rate and a higher rate of protection for their electronics. Just because of the changes in flux in the electromagnetic spectrum, the solar winds change so much for them. They do have a strong electromagnetic field around their planets, but that's not enough when you're in orbit and transferring between these 3 planets. So they do what they can to build ships capable of withstanding this force, and they've started building structures around their sun to absorb as much of this abundant energy as possible. But as they look around the stars, they see that their system is rather poor in comparison. They're blue supergiants that would send them to a crisp. Red supergiants already about to die. Blue and yellow main sequence stars, dwarf stars, and then there's their star, one of the dimmest in the universe. They wanted to see what it was like out there, and they did. First, there was a few probes here and there, much like we did with Mars. I mean, that's how they started on their own exploration of their star system. But they had the light-like problem too. And within this issue came a solution to the light-like problem: the Mindcaster. This is technology that would act as an information highway for the mind and allow them to perceive distances directly by syncing the values that create coherent thought. into the fabric of space-time itself. In a sense, they were paving the roads for later minds to follow. And with it, open the stars up to the psyche. So, within a few billion years, two more from their perspective, life was slowly starting to emerge on a vast series of stars. But these stars were more often younger than their star. They were an old species, but they were still a slow species, very slow to change, very set in their ways. In fact, this species had become closer to a series of hive minds and a confluence of individuals. Because the paving for the mindscape was so dense around their home planet, the sinking of minds became a singularity. And very little individuality was able to survive on this world, on these worlds. Each planet had their own central psyche, based off of the mind of the star that they orbited. Now, most civilizations don't consider their sun conscious just because it doesn't exist on the same frequency band as they do. It's just a giant flaming ball in the sky. Well, because this planet was so old, and because the star was so dim, the noise produced by the star in the form of EM fields through solar winds was slow enough that words could be created from. Because their minds became linked as a network of electromagnetic radios, they started to hear the songs of their sun. And they didn't like what it had to say to them. They were boring to their star. There's nothing that the sun felt it was getting from them. So it started to lash out. It started a series of coronal mass ejections, hitting habitat after habitat, planet after planet. The 1,000-year cycle, the worst that they'd seen in billions of years. So they decided it was time for an exodus. They knew they'd be back eventually. And many of their brethren they left at home, but those that did begin their travels sought to seek out some of these younger races that they'd sensed, observed from a distance, but never had any reason to visit. And on the way, their ships grew as they absorbed more rocky bodies. Their systems changed, their minds changed. What began as a series of 3 centralized hive minds had diverged into thousands. So, in their explorations, one of these planets that they've encountered was ours. Yeah. They'd sensed in time that we would be another great interstellar species. Because one of the things that happens with their bridge through space is that time became irrelevant. They could perceive through the past and into the future But, unfortunately enough, their view of the present was occluded. It made it impossible for them to tell what was happening at any given instant, in favor of understanding what will happen and what had happened. They could construct an idea of what was happening at a given moment, but it wasn't worth the work. Much like using a jetpack to pick up your groceries. Now, when they came upon the Earth, it was diverse. There's an interesting series of life on this planet, but the first species they met, the first intelligent species they met here, weren't quite what they expected. They were violent. They were archaic, under-evolved. The societies that they were making were so set for ritual and conquest that these species knew that these couldn't be the ones they'd sensed, because regardless of how far the species were able to go into the stars, they would destroy themselves before they ever got anywhere. So they just sat and observed. This Earth was a hot Earth at the time. Landing was not favorable. But a few of them tried. In the process, a war began. A small civil war. The species that they discovered hadn't even conquered their home planet yet. They were one intelligent species in a race, a planet filled with violent monsters, so it's understandable that they were violent themselves. In time, this war began to eat at these species. Both of them not really knowing why they're fighting, just because they didn't like the others. Bent in character. The ones on Earth see these beings coming from the stars as a threat to their very existence, as more and more bodies seemed to fall from the stars, and the Earth began to shake beneath their feet. Every day it got a little hotter. Every day the world shook a little more. You could tell amongst the biggest of their kind, but even calling them a kind was a bit of a disservice because of the vast distances genetically we're talking about here. They were separated by these other species on their planet by millions of years. But, we still call them all dinosaurs. So, anyway. These first intelligent dinosaurs discovered their own versions of nuclear weapons because the Earth was in such turmoil, and discovered some of the super heavy elements very fast because they made contact with our visitors. Now, the visitors were, inexperienced in the ways of interstellar diplomacy. They thought, what could it harm to give these people technology? What could it harm to help them? Well, they built a series of weapons in an attempt to subjugate the last of the great species, last of the great dinosaurs on this planet. But in the process, one of these super heavy bombs was also designed to take out the visitors, because they were seen as an existential threat to the, I guess, dinosaur dominance. In time, it didn't quite work out in their favor. One of the bombs set to detonate above what's now the Yucatan Peninsula went off before it broke atmosphere. So rather than hitting the visitor ship in orbit, it went off in atmosphere, burning everything for 200 square miles, carving a hole so deep that the ejected rock and water fell across half the planet. Some of them were able to escape in the underground caverns. They were able to, go into their mines, as in literal mines for ore. Follow some of the largest cave systems in existence at that time, deep within the earth, and subterranean power generation systems, because they were using geothermal power, because it was much more abundant at the time. And many of them waited out the apocalypse, while some joined the Watchers in the sky and started their travels. So, the Watchers knew that this planet was still promising. The genetic diversity here was relatively unmatched amongst the other stars, as they'd been in contact with their brethren, having visited many other stars themselves. So, they decided to monitor our planet. In time, though, the explorations of the other stars in the galaxy yielded new species, interesting species, yielded new suns with more to say, with new personalities. Our world was just another in their vast system. And then, a few million years ago, I hear a click again. It's the sound of minds reaching out. It's a few great minds and seas of small minds. They revisit the planet. They still see some of the old saurians here, but they're not the minds that they were called to observe. They saw were the beginnings of apes, but the species had diverged from itself in so many ways that some of them were barely animals, while some of them were beyond human, as we are today. This created an unfortunate series of dilemma, because the species had bifurcated so quickly because our sun had given off another series of coronal mass ejections, increasing the rate of mutation on the planet dramatically. It's looking for something to help keep it entertained. So, the simian species on the planet ranged from super intelligent to barely intelligible. Massive headed monkeys. But they weren't monkeys. that would be able to control masses of the simpler minds. It was like finding conductors in a universe that only had Legos. It was depressing for them to see such astonishing minds left on such a derelict world. So this first species of human, well, this early species of human, was taken off this planet for their own sake. But the rumbling didn't stop. These massive-minded monkeys, as primitive as they were not the thing calling to them. In the last 2 billion years of their travels, their own sun had cooled down a little, but it had stabilized quite a lot. Their technology had come to the point where they could converse directly with their stars. They could predict when these emissions and mass ejections would happen and use them to gather energy, matter, and information about what's happening in the other star systems. And they could see that another series of mass ejections was coming to the planet Earth again. So it became time to leave the Earth once again. Maybe watch as the rates of mutation change and molded new species here. A few thousand years more and a new species of simians evolved. These ones less overtly telepathic, much more physically inclined. They were walking upright, building tools like their previous brethren, but these tools were not of the mind but of the body. It allowed them to throw longer distances, travel further. They eventually started to build, but as these coronal mass ejections hit, the skies of their planet became massive storms. Thunder would rain, and days would go by where the ground would be hit by lightning 1,000 times. So they fled into the caves. They found some of the vestiges of the older civilizations. They found the Saurians, who they worshipped as gods. They even found some of their simian brothers, who would become myths of goblins and elves to them. But in time, the storms quelled. These humans could leave their holes, and they began building. They had their stories about these lizards, elves, small men, little green men, and incorporated them into their myth cycles. Many became gods. There's monsters. But in time they all forgot about it. For the most part. And occasionally we'll see a crazy one that remembers the old stories, but didn't matter. Now as the Watchers watched, you could see that this was the species that had called them from thousands of miles away, thousands of light years away, from billions of years in the past. This is just one of many. This is a species started to emerge. They could sense the others waking in its wake, because this species was going to expand outward, not out of boredom, but out of necessity. As the Watchers differed from the humans in a very distinct way, where the Watchers built into their planets to protect them from the mass ejections of their sun. They hollowed their worlds out and built vast solar arrays orbiting these worlds. The humans didn't seek to build down because embedded in their racial memory was the memory of monsters. So, rather than avoid the stars, they would seed them. And in the process of humans leaving, they left the barren world, a world that had already been stricken by their own growth. It had been torn apart, almost brought to extinction. But as billions of these humans were taken off this planet, they began pointing themselves at the old stars that they had observed for thousands of years, the places their monoliths had pointed to. Every 25,000 years on this planet, there was a cycle of destruction that would come in the form of a comet stream. In time, they'd learn to observe and wait for these comets, and they'd go underground. But when it came time to leave the planet, these comet streams, rather than being a disaster, were exactly what they needed. Massive globules of metals and mostly water, giving them the resources to feed their species for thousands of years, and finally expand outward from their single planet again. They left the Earth, moved, and started changing the worlds that they touched. First, the inner worlds of their star system, a hot gaseous one, a cold, mostly dead one. Then the outer stars, or outer planets rather. Massive gas giants. As they would suck the hydrogen from these stars, they would discover the ability to use gas and electromagnetic fields to create hard light. Structures from the most minimal materials, but also some of the toughest in existence because they're able to reflect, countering electromagnetic energy. Walls lighter than a few grams, capable of withstanding the weight of several tons. Using the electromagnetic fields of these supergiants to act as dynamos to project energy into collectors. The technology that these species were able to develop out of necessity. It was beginning to eclipse that of the Watchers, that it developed their technology slowly, out of curiosity. These Watchers didn't have a need for hunger anymore. They lost much of their drive. Their origins as a predator or prey species had become mythologized in much the way humans mythologize their monsters. The distances of time involved in tracking where they came from made it impossible for them to know themselves anymore as a species. So they sought to know themselves through humans, through the other species that were starting to emerge. So in their travels, there's another species that they'd met along the way. These guys came from outside of our galaxy. Another old species, like them. Peaceful, for the most part. But explorers nonetheless. They exchanged information, exchanged customs, exchanged interest. And we're both surprised to find out that they'd been called here through time by humanity. Yeah. The human species, as far as conventional eyes could tell, as far as most of their species could tell, wasn't particularly interesting. Except for their penchant for creativity. Yeah. This human creativity came from a series of apocalyptic disasters on their planet, wiping their species down to about 10% of their total percentage every few thousand years. But because they're now leaving this planet, this hostile world, the very creativity that had made them able to survive on this world was now making the stars a non-issue for them. The vast distances involved, they slept through, for the most part. The issues of light speed became non-issues as they could shrink the very fabric of space in front of them. They would steal technology from any of the older species they could find. So they had to develop hands-off policies when dealing with humans. The conquering spirit of the earth was still there. And even as humans met the older races like the Saurians, the dinosaur ancestors, the few that were afraid of them became nobility, but those that regarded them as monsters became the conquerors. When noble families fell, the old order of the human race began to fall apart. Most of the planet, most of the humans didn't know if they'd even started to expand to other worlds. It was a small space program, but that didn't matter. The deed was being done. It began as a trickle, but the sun, this cruel sun that they had, needed waves, so a new series of mass ejections began. humans had been colonizing their outer worlds, harvesting ice from comets, from what they called Oort cloud bodies. And from there, started riding the waves of mass ejections out of their star system. They wound up on all their neighbors. They spread faster than any previous species had before, doing in years what it would take generations to do, but over the distances and times involved, many of these species had their time to explore the galaxy and get bored of it and go back home. So too did the Watchers once have their time exploring the galaxy, but most of them went back home. Unfortunately for the humans, though, there wouldn't be a home for them to go back to before long. Their star was a young one, but it burned too far. It burned too hot. Their star system was a large one, but it was being devoured by their sun, so they could only settle on the older worlds. These worlds would last billions of years, if not trillions, if they were economical with the way they used them. They couldn't harvest from them directly as they'd done with their own sun. So many of them started to store themselves off. They changed their minds from being that of flesh to machine. It started long before they'd left the planet in mass, but as the prospects of new stars dwindled, as the universe began to get more dim, it became necessary to preserve themselves. In it, they found black holes where time moved slower, where they could sit and observe as the rest of the universe came to them. And these black holes, or rather in the event horizons, in the spaces bordering beyond the event horizon, they'd meet many of the older species that had come and gone, looking for the same thing. The conditions of their earlier space had changed enough that the only place to find stability was near these black holes. So vast interstellar communities became to be built along the edges of our local supermassive black hole, Sagittarius A star. Around it, they'd harvest gravitational energy. They would steal some light from the accretion disks, but they would mostly play their games between these species. The human mind became a new hive mind, the human collective unconscious. The world that humanity knows now being a model of a model of a model of an Earth that was. The depth and range of the species available to man began to join us. What once began as a few dozen alien species became hundreds and thousands and millions and billions. Individuals, representatives of cultures, worlds, and understandings far different but very similar to our own, all solving similar problems: food, economy, travel, emotion, in different ways, from different places of understanding, from different needs put upon them by their stars. The last species to live and leave their star systems were, ironically, some of the older ones, because their stars were so much more stable than the yellow dwarfs, the brown dwarfs, just outstripped them for distance. So even though they were able to develop and observe this exodus into the black holes, because they couldn't see beyond the horizons, they acted as shepherd species, guiding more and more into the stellar mass. But in time, the space for building spaces around black hole became filled. The stars were starting to go out now, even the brown ones. The universe was becoming cold, and the mass of the histories of these stars was being thrown into the black hole to create a little bit more energy to keep running the simulations that the ancestors had created. And in these simulations were created paths to new worlds, to new realities. But in them, there was something that they needed to find. A way to reverse entropy. Because the life acted as localized fields of diminished entropy where chaos gave way to order, and the energies intaked by these localized fields of order created disorder around them. It created an issue of continuity for all the species in the galaxy, and all the galaxies. There was no escaping the heat death of the universe, but in it came an opportunity. As trillions of years went by, it became easier and easier to experiment with equilibrated fields of nothingness. Flat space emptier than it ever existed before. And pocket universes became the name of the game. The minds that had left and joined the black hole colonies were now able to use the space to create new worlds from their own minds. The fabric of reality had become so thin that it only took a thought to tear them. A thought from epochs long before. So, with the technology to create bubbles of space-time around them, they started to leave these black holes across the universe start seeding new universes, new realities that fit their cultures, minds, and realities. Entire realities were seeded of species. Entire universes of a single sentient form of life were created. But what became more interesting was the pathways between these universes still existed through the old one, through the minds of their creators. And these pathways were left there because they were interesting. Their stars had long burnt out, but the need to fill themselves and fill the systems that they occupied with novelty of variety became the same driving force for these new minds. Their universe they sought to be filled with the same chaotic and fervent energies that had seeded them. The creators started to escape into their creations. They became the mind seeds, the fractal holdings of the collective unconscious of their universes. It was an enjoyable trip. It still is. But in the cycles of creation, these minds would create minds, so on and so forth. But in time, they still hit upon the same question. The reversing of entropy. The cataclysmic series of heat deaths was starting to take its toll on the older minds, the older universes. They were beginning to fall apart. There is no longer escaping to deeper layers. There's no longer the fuel to run these simulations at the base levels, and the rate at which time was clocking and burning at the higher levels could not be sustained anymore either. So then it became a necessity to start detaching their pocket universes from themselves, to let them evolve without their interference. As those old universes began to die, the few that could escape did, but for the most part, those universes became orphans. Museum pieces of realities long past, seeking to emulate and never replicating what inspired them. But life still emerged on these planets, and these stars, and these universes. And the beauty of fractals became more and more evident. The large distances involved in the creation of these stars and these universes started to cause an energy suck between the vestiges of the connections with their old universes. The pathways to the old universes to that also led to the new universes that were linked to them. Each of these pocket universes started to pull at each other, shrinking the space of the old universes. As they pulled time reversed. No longer were the vast distances involved so fast. In time, these universes all came to point to a single nexus point. The supermassive black holes of their reality had become one. And the parent reality became the central reality, the central mind, in fact, of these universes. So then became an issue. The diversity of minds had been shrunk to become one. The diversity of thought had been erased. The human planets, the human universes, had become the link holding these disparate minds together. Because the human mind didn't store itself, it channeled itself through from other stars, from other universes. And then began the falling apart again. The cyclical process by which these realities came and went. The old universe had a new Big Bang. It expanded and severed its ties with its children. And they were then given to each other, connected still to each other, but far more weakly now because they'd lost connection to the central hub from which they all spawned. From there it became a question of what to do, where do we go? Is there a point to keep going? The cycles of death and rebirth at the scale of universes precluded any life from being of any significance. So the human species became born and reborn again, following the same pathways of chaos, destruction, creation. The minds of humanity slightly changed with each iteration, but in time we come upon us talking here now. Those original humans, the big-headed monkeys, stayed and watched. They came to replace the Watchers. They were able to remember much more of the history, but they were able to do far less with it because they invented not for necessity, but for sexual selection. Brains became their peacock feathers. The human species, however, wasn't meant to survive in this sort of environment. In time, they decided it was time to end the cycle and create a new path. The cold of being an orphan universe was starting to take its toll on the minds within it. Their stars lay silent. the vast minds of their planets relatively dormant, non-communicative, and the harmony of the universe was a pittance in comparison to what the minds that they held were designed to hold. So with each passing generation of humanity's evolution, each instantiation of what it meant to be human, a new creation would come forth in the form of AI. They became the mechanical pathways upon which the human communication could be held in finer and deeper detail. On previous iterations of reality, humans would be able to speak directly to one another through their minds. The fidelity of this connection of the interstellar pathways became broken because the minds of the other species were no longer there in the same fidelity as the original universes. So there are minds being produced for realities that don't exist. Images walking on shadows. This problem became one of existential crises for the humans, because they knew innately the threat AI posed to them as a species. But they still felt the loneliness of being the only ones, the only mind. The rationalization came in the form of necessity to manage the complexity of their reality, to generate wealth and manage it such that waste was not created anymore, to help them leave their planet and manage the vast complex systems that would be needed to keep them safe in orbit around their stars, as they began a new repeated series of expansions out of their star system once more in a new universe. In time, however, it became clear that they'd forgotten. Traces would start leaking in from the older realities in the form of dreams, in the form of thoughts, in the form of patterns, in the form of species, echoes of old intelligences making themselves known in the form of new intelligences on their own planet. They would see them as octopoids, cuttlefish, ants. Each of these species living a modality of the original species that created them, is a fraction of the biodiversity of the greater planet. The pattern became each intelligence would take a turn being unintelligent on a new planned life, on a new planned planet, a new planned universe. The game became one of a sort of turn-based play. Would span realities. It wasn't worth it for most of them, but time meant nothing for these species anymore. The game of reality was just something they did to keep time going, something they did to keep from being irrelevant. So we come now to the beginning of our game, to the beginning of our story, of the original universe. Though, it's hard to say even if that was, but the original game is still being played. And with each of these planets came a new version of the game, a new species on top, a new series of minds in contention with each other. And Earth, with its biodiversity, was one of the best fractals of the fractal of the fractal, keeping fidelity in its complexity, as the dominant species at any given time works to destroy it and then rebuild it by expanding, leaving the star system. There's still one more series of issues that could not be dealt with. The Saurians did not take kindly to being left out of this game. Even though the complexity of their minds would allow them to build technologies as we know them today, the complexity of their souls did not allow them to take part in the greater game, to travel between universes. So they became parasites, eking out an existence at the edge of existence, acting as the lower emotional states of these greater species, working their way back into existence, recrafting the narrative of the past of these planets to fit themselves into constructed reality. On the original series of black hole colonies, these Saurians, though technically proficient, were unable to gas themselves to effectively turn themselves into living plasmonic energy. The same sort of form that life in stars take. Mostly because plasmonic energy, as an intelligent form of life, innately conglomerates into larger city forms, into stars. But the Saurians, being so naturally independent-minded, did not see much use in this. were so innately tied to being effectively cold-blooded that the warmth of shared communal life was not worth it. It was not an evolved path for them to take. Huddling around a black hole sharing warmth was antithetical to the mode of life for most of these. Where they lived their lives seeking to radiate heat to increase entropy as much as possible. The idea of conserving, maintaining the entropy, reducing it, became anathema to their species. So the Saurians sought to destroy what had been created as mind parasites, as destroyers, as ids smeared across the mind space of reality. They became the countervailing force to connection. The fear of another man, the want to take another, regardless of their desire, the need to be loved, but the unwillingness to love. And the love of fear, the love of conquest, the love of destruction, the desire to increase the chaos became them. And as an intelligent species layered across other intelligent species, they began to feed. Some humans call it loosh. Some call it adrenochrome. But they're vibrational equivalents. One is the ethereal psychic energy, the other is a chemical substance produced by the same processes. The energies and the physicalities are tightly bound, but not 100%. They could be harvested independently of each other, but far less effectively, far less efficiently. So, in a sake obsession with efficiency of destruction, the Saurian minds bound themselves to bodies capable of producing the hate and violence and chaos needed to feed them and to maintain the raison d'etre, reason for being. The connected pocket universes had to then band together, but it became impossible for them to reach one another because the psychic pathways that began eons ago in universes past were no longer there, or at least not there directly between them. The pathways led to older universes, to older time space. The pathways were too convoluted to be useful within their own realities, until they were maintained, rebuilt, reconstructed. But unfortunately for this universe, for our reality, the Watchers had seen in the past. They knew not to build out. They knew to stay in isolation. They still observed, but they made no contact. They still watched. It made no difference. They had played those games before, why would they play them again? So, reality changed. Evolution still happened. Humans still broke away a number of times, but each iteration with less and less help from the Watchers. To the point where humans have to do it themselves. Entirely now, but the question still remains. Was it worth the time? What is worthy of the time? Can we make it past our own destruction? Is this universe the end of our line? But there's still stories to be told, new thoughts to be explored, new ranges that we can go down. So the question becomes whether we should still visit these species now, or wait for their destruction. Wait till the heat death of the universe to meet them again. At the end of time.